When Israel occupied East Jerusalem in 1967, they annexed the city and they applied, as previous panels explained, they applied Israeli law, civilian law, inside Jerusalem. But then, what happened to the Palestinian population in Jerusalem? What was the status of Palestinians in Jerusalem? Did they give them a citizenship as any? If the annexation was legal and normal, that would be the norm. That would be the natural result. Of course not. No, they did not do that. They gave a residency status. So they applied to all the Palestinians in Jerusalem this case of people who would immigrate to another country. So if you think about Britain here, if someone immigrates to here, after a certain period of time, they manage to get a permanent residency status, right? This is an exact status that all Palestinians in Jerusalem got when Israel occupied East Jerusalem. Now, over the time, Israel started developing methods in order to revoke this residency status. In the early stages of the occupation, Israel revoked the residency status based on three criteria, any of the three criteria. If a Palestinian leaves Israel for a period of, which includes Jerusalem, for a period of 7 years or more, or if a person, if the resident gets a residency abroad or a citizenship abroad. If any of these three conditions were fulfilled, the Palestinian was liable to lose their residency status, which means that they cannot return and live. And in that case, they considered Israel all of Palestine. So you have to actually cross the borders and leave, go to some other country other than the West Bank and Gaza. But then they started developing the system to become worse as time went by. In 1988, there was an important case in the Israeli Supreme Court called the Awad case. That is a person called Mubarak Awad, who was a peace activist and a resistance person who resisted the occupation peacefully. He was a professor in the United States. He had left before to the United States. He lived for a number of years. He got married in the United States, and he got a residency and a citizenship abroad. And then when he came back, the Minister of Interior decided to revoke his residency status, also because they justified this at that time, that also he was an activist, and that was a reason to deport him, not only to revoke his status, but also deport him to the United States. During that case, the court, and there was a famous judge of the Supreme Court who wrote that decision, called Aharon Barak. He wrote that Mubarak Awad, when he left to the United States, he uprooted himself from Israel and he rooted himself in the United States, and therefore he lost his right to live in Israel because he is only a resident and not a citizen. And then Justice Barak invented a new term called the center of life. He said, since Mubarak Awad has moved his center of life to outside Israel, since the resident has moved his center of life to outside Israel, then this person can no longer be considered a resident. Then a few years later, I only talked for 5 minutes. I have but stopwatch. A few years later, in 1995, there was a new case. A lady called Fathiyya Shiqaqi, who was the wife of Fathi Shiqaqi, the founder of the Islamic Jihad movement. Fathi Shiqaqi was forcibly deported to Lebanon because of his political activity. From Lebanon, he moved to Syria, and he lived in Syria. His wife, Fathiyya, followed him to Syria, and she lived with him there. She stayed 6 years in Syria, and then 6 years later, she came back to renew her ID card and to register her newborn children. She was shocked that the Ministry of Interior told her, your residency has been revoked. Now, why do you think she came after 6 years? Because she knew that if she lives for 7 years, she will lose the residency. So she was actually very, observing this terrible law. So she came after 6 years. They said, no, it doesn't. And then she went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, well, you don't have to actually live for 7 years. Only if you move your center of life according to the circumstances to outside Israel, then you will be liable to lose your residency status. This moment, 1995, do you know what was happening in 1995? The peace process started. West Bank became, we had a Palestinian Authority, and Israel started doing big changes after 1995, right? So after that moment, Israel started revoking hundreds of residency statuses, thousands actually, of residency statuses from Palestinians, because they were living in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And from that moment on, they started considering a person living in the West Bank or Gaza Strip as a person who has moved his or her center of life to outside Israel. So the residency revocation policy speeded up during that period. Then, then the most recent development that happened is in 2006 and, 2017 as well. So in 2006, the Minister of Interior, there were Palestinian elections. The Palestinians elected parliament members from Jerusalem who belonged to the Hamas bloc. So as soon as they were elected, the Ministry of Interior decided to revoke the residencies of 3 Palestinian Legislative Council members, as well as another minister for Jerusalem affairs. So 4 politicians, their residency were revoked, and then they took them and they sent them to the West Bank. These persons went to the Supreme Court and to object. But what was their center of life? There was no issue about the center of life, nothing in the law. So what was the justification? These 4 individuals have breached their allegiance to the state of Israel. It was the first time we hear about breach of allegiance as a justification to revoke residencies from people under occupation, and especially from the Palestinians, even if it was a new precedent in the Israeli legal system itself. So obviously, these 4 parliamentarians went to the court, and they said, of course, there is no such thing as allegiance. Meanwhile, Israel revoked the residencies of another 9 persons. So we have a total now of 13 persons whose residencies are revoked because of this justification, breach of allegiance. 5 of them are accused of setting up a bomb, not accused, they are convicted of setting up a bomb in the Hebrew University. And 4 of them were accused, just from the moment that they were arrested and accused of throwing a stone that allegedly resulted in the death of the driver. So throwing a stone, they were also, their residency was revoked based on breach of allegiance. So these are the 13 cases. Now, the Supreme Court decided the case last year, and in September 2017, and the Supreme Court said there is no justification under the current Israeli legal system to revoke residencies of permanent residents based on allegiance, because this doesn't exist in the legal system yet. However, so there's a however always, we're going to keep this revocation for a duration of 6 months and give a chance to the government to suggest a law at the Israeli Knesset that will allow such revocations. In November 2017, the Israeli government introduced a new bill in the Knesset, according to which, and it is currently in the Knesset, it has gone through the first reading, and I think it will pass. I'm afraid it will. No, hopefully not. Where are the Knesset members? They left. They were here. Okay. According to this bill, the residency of a permanent resident will be revoked based on breach of allegiance, and the term breach of allegiance was defined very, very broadly. For example, breach of allegiance can be an act of terror or assistance or attempt or incitement to commit such an act, or an activity, or actively participate in a terrorist organization. Of course, terrorist organization is a very, very, very wide term in the Israeli legal system. Second thing, treason. Treason? I don't know what treason means, but treason. So if we act, an act of treason will be also resident. Will have his residency revoked. And third, acquisition of a citizenship from one of the from certain enemy states. So now we're going into a new stage. Center of life is not enough, and now we will have the breach of allegiance as a new criterion for revoking residencies. I think we are, the human rights community in Palestine is very concerned with this. We believe it's going to, so far we have, there are more than 14,500 residencies revoked. Most of them were revoked after introducing the center of life criterion. Now, after introducing the new criterion of allegiance, I don't know if I come back to a conference like that in a few years, I don't know what the figures will look like, and we are very concerned about that. Now, residency revocation is only one of the problems of residency. I'm going to only mention two other problems without explaining, because I have 1 minute 40 seconds left. The second problem is child registration. Because Palestinians are not citizens, Jerusalemites are not citizens, the children, our children, do not get registered as people who have right to live in Jerusalem automatically. We have to fulfill many, many conditions, including the center of life in Israel, in order to register our children as residents. Many people do not manage to fulfill these conditions, and we have currently a figure of around, we're not sure about that figure, a figure that is around 10,000 children who have no registration. What does it mean when you have no registration? It means you have no rights in the legal system, including social welfare, medical insurance, and the like. So it is, all these children are currently living maybe in Jerusalem or around Jerusalem, and they have no legal status whatsoever. And the final restriction that I wanted to mention is family unification. If a Palestinian from Jerusalem wants to marry a woman or a man from the West Bank or Gaza, or a few other countries, there is a restriction that they cannot invite the spouse to come and live in Jerusalem according to the Israeli law. Therefore, this is only one of the methods of controlling Palestinians. We have, we receive hundreds of cases on a, like that. We're managing hundreds of cases like that. And the people who suffer from this problem are living in general terrible lives. Thank you for listening, and